His final words were like stones hurled from a great height, meant to shatter what little of her was left. "You are a burden, Cora," Bertrand Croft had declared, his voice raw with the grief he had twisted into malice. "A constant, useless reminder of the son I lost." He was her father-in-law, the man who was supposed to be her protector now that her husband, Thomas, was gone, laid to rest in the unforgiving soil. Instead, he had cast her out. The heavy oak door of the Croft Ranch house slammed shut, the sound echoing the finality of a grave being filled. She stood on the dusty track with nothing but a small carpet bag containing a change of clothes and her mother's old book of pressed wildflowers, its pages a fragile testament to a gentler time. Despair was a physical weight on her shoulders, pressing her down, urging her to sink into the dust and simply cease. The town of Providence was a day's walk, a faint shimmer of hope on the horizon. With each step, Bertrand's words chased her. Useless. A burden. She had tried so hard to prove her worth after Thomas's passing, mending, cooking, managing the household accounts with a quiet efficiency, but her efforts were met with a wall of cold resentment. Now, she was adrift in a world that had no place for a lone, penniless widow. Her fingers tightened around the worn cover of the book in her bag. It was a symbol of home, a place of safety and love that felt as distant and mythical as the stars. Providence was less a haven and more a collection of weathered buildings squinting under the relentless sun. Cora's disheveled appearance, her face streaked with dust and unshed tears, drew looks that ranged from pity to suspicion. She was a problem to be solved, or worse, ignored. She sought work at the Mercantile, but the proprietor looked her up and down and saw only a mouth to feed, not a pair of capable hands. "Nothing for you here," he'd said dismissively. At the saloon, the leering glances of the patron sent a chill of fear down her spine, and she fled before she could even ask for a job scrubbing floors. Each rejection was another of Bertrand's stones, chipping away at her resolve. By late afternoon, she found herself slumped on a bench outside the town's boarding house, the last of her strength failing her. The world felt hard and sharp-edged, and she was too soft, too broken to find a foothold. She thought of giving up, of simply walking back out into the prairie and letting the vast emptiness swallow her whole. The thought was terrifyingly seductive. She pulled the wildflower book from her bag, opening it to a page with a faded bluebonnet. Her mother had written beneath it, "Even in the hardest soil, beauty finds a way to grow." A tear splashed onto the page, blurring the delicate script. Was there any hard soil left in her for beauty to grow? Or was she just a barren plot, a burden to the earth itself? A pair of sturdy, scuffed boots stopped in front of her. Cora looked up into the weathered face of a woman in her late 50s, her graying hair pinned in a stern bun that defied the prairie wind. Her eyes, however, held a shrewd, assessing quality, not the cold judgment Cora had grown to expect. "You look like you've been chewed up and spat out by a wolf," the woman stated, her voice as no-nonsense as her appearance. "And weeping on my bench isn't going to mend your troubles." This was Agnes Barlow, the proprietor of the boarding house. Her reputation for a sharp tongue was matched only by her reputation for a fair hand. Cora, mortified, hastily wiped her eyes and tried to stand, her limbs trembling with exhaustion. "I'm sorry. I'll be on my way." Agnes held up a hand, stopping her. "Hold on. I didn't say to run off. I said stop weeping." There's a difference. Her gaze softened almost imperceptibly as she took in Cora's worn dress and the desperate hope flickering in her eyes. "I need a girl to help with the laundry and the kitchen. The work is hard and the pay is a roof over your head and 3 meals a day. I don't abide laziness and I don't suffer fools." "What do you say?" It wasn't an offer of pity. It was a transaction. It was a chance. It was the first time in months anyone had suggested she was capable of providing something of value. "Yes," Cora whispered, her voice thick with relief. "I say yes. I work very hard." Agnes gave a curt nod. "We'll see about that. Come on, then." Supper won't cook itself. Cora followed her into the warm, savory-smelling boarding house, leaving the harsh judgment of the street behind her. The weeks that followed were filled with the hardest work Cora had ever known, but it was a cleansing, purposeful labor. She scrubbed floors, washed mountains of laundry, peeled potatoes until her fingers were raw, and fell into her small attic bed each night with an ache in her bones that was more satisfying than any rest she'd had at the Croft Ranch. She did not complain, and she did her work with a meticulous care that did not go unnoticed by Agnes. The older woman, though sparing with her praise, would leave an extra biscuit on Cora's plate or ensure the water for her bath was hottest. It was in these small, unspoken gestures that Cora began to feel the first stirrings of belonging. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Agnes found Cora poring over the boarding house ledgers, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The sums are wrong," Cora said quietly, pointing to a column of figures. "Whoever did your books last month overcharged you for flour by $2. Agnes peered at the ledger, then at Cora, a new respect dawning in her eyes. From that day on, keeping the accounts became one of Cora's duties, a task she performed with an intelligence and skill that saved Agnes a considerable amount of money. It was during these quieter afternoons, sitting at the front desk with the ledger, that she first met Arthur Morgan. He was a rancher, a man whose presence filled a room without him saying a word. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with kind eyes and a quiet, respectful demeanor. He came in once a week to pay for the lodging of one of his ranch hands, and he always addressed Cora with a gentle courtesy that made her feel like a person, not a servant. He would ask about her day, his gaze sincere, and he listened, truly listened, to her answers. Arthur Morgan's weekly visits became the anchor of Cora's week. She found herself listening for the sound of his boots on the porch, her heart giving a small, traitorous leap when he entered. He began to find excuses to linger, asking her opinion on the price of grain or the news from the eastern papers. He never overstepped, never presumed. His respect was a steady, warming sun on the tender shoots of her recovering self-esteem. He saw not the penniless widow or Agnes's charity case, he saw a sharp mind and a gentle soul. "Mrs. Barlow tells me you have a true gift for numbers," he said one afternoon, leaning against the counter. "She says you've saved her establishment from being swindled more than once." Cora blushed, ducking her head to her ledger. "I only point out what's there, Mr. Morgan, please, call me Arthur," he insisted softly. "And there's no only about it. A sharp mind is a valuable thing, Mrs. Croft." Very valuable. The word valuable sent a jolt through her. It was the direct opposite of Bertrand's useless, a healing balm applied directly to her deepest wound. She looked up and met his gaze, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. This man, this good and respected man, saw worth in her. The cautious hope she had harbored began to blossom into something more daring. She started to speak more in his presence, sharing small observations and thoughts, and he received them like treasures, encouraging her with his full attention. A fragile, unspoken understanding began to grow between them, a connection woven from quiet conversations and shared glances across the bustling boarding house dining room. The dry spell that had plagued the region for months finally broke on a sweltering August night. But the relief of rain quickly turned to terror as a bolt of lightning, sharp and vicious, struck the roof of the livery stable at the end of town. The old, dry timber went up like a tinderbox. The fire alarm bell clanged frantically, pulling the people of Providence from their beds. The volunteer fire brigade was a chaotic mess of shouting men and inefficient bucket lines. The flames, fanned by a rising wind, leaped from the stable to the adjacent blacksmith's shop. Panic began to set in as the fire threatened to consume the entire street. It was Cora who brought order to the chaos. While men shouted and ran, she saw what needed to be done. Her voice, clear and commanding, cut through the noise. "Form 2 lines to the well. Pass the full buckets up and the empty ones back. Don't just throw the water, aim for the base of the flames." Her experience managing a household, organizing tasks, and seeing a problem through to its solution, suddenly became a vital town asset. She organized the women to soak blankets to protect the nearest roofs and directed others to move the panicked horses from a nearby corral. Arthur, who had ridden into town at the first sign of fire, saw her immediately. He was working to pull down a burning awning when he heard her voice and saw her, a smudge of soot on her cheek, her eyes bright with purpose, directing the fight with the calm authority of a general. He and his men immediately fell in with her commands, their strength and her strategy turning the tide. By dawn, the fire was out, the livery and blacksmith shop were smoking ruins, but the rest of the town had been saved. The town of Providence awoke the next morning to the acrid smell of smoke and a profound sense of gratitude. The story of Cora's heroism had spread like wildfire itself. She was no longer just the quiet girl from the boarding house, she was the woman who had saved their town. But Cora felt only exhaustion, the adrenaline of the night giving way to a bone-deep weariness. She was helping Agnes serve breakfast to the weary firefighters when Arthur entered. He bypassed the coffee pot and walked directly to her. His face was grim with exhaustion and smudged with soot, but his eyes, when they met hers, were full of an emotion so intense it made her breath catch. He gently took the plate from her hands and set it down. "You've done enough," he said, his voice low and firm, meant only for her. "You have been on your feet all night, running on nothing but courage. It's over now." He looked at her, seeing the trembling in her hands, the deep shadows of fatigue under her eyes. "You're going to sit down and have a hot meal. Then you're going to a warm bath. And after that," he paused, his gaze softening with an incredible tenderness, "you're going to bed. With me standing watch outside your door to make sure not a soul disturbs your rest. You are done taking care of everyone else, Cora. It's my turn to take care of you." It was not a command, but a vow. A profound declaration of protection and care that went far beyond the events of the night. It was in that moment, standing in the middle of the crowded dining room, that Cora knew she was irrevocably in love with him. He saw her worth not just in a crisis, but in her very being, and he was determined to cherish it. A few weeks later, as the town was rebuilding, a dusty, travel-worn man rode into Providence. He stopped his horse in front of the boarding house and dismounted with the slow, pained movements of an old man. Cora was sweeping the porch and she froze, the broom dropping from her hands. It was Bertrand Croft. The cruel, angry man she remembered was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. His face was a roadmap of regret, his eyes filled with a desperate, sorrowful light. "Cora," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He took a shuffling step toward her. I was wrong." He told her how the silence of the ranch house had become a roaring torment in his ears. He had found Thomas's old letters, filled with loving praise for his wife's intelligence, her kindness, her quiet strength. The goodness of the son he missed so dearly had shone a harsh light on his own bitter cruelty. "He saw you, truly saw you, and I was blinded by my own pain," Bertrand confessed, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. "I called you a burden, but the truth is, you were the heart of that home. When you left, it died." He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. "This is your inheritance from Thomas. I kept it from you. It's not much, but it's yours. I don't ask you to forgive me for the money. I beg you to forgive me for my words. For my heart. I am so sorry." Cora looked at the man who had caused her so much pain. The anger she had held onto for so long had vanished, replaced by a quiet, startling wave of pity. She had built a new life here. She had found her worth. She did not need his apology to be whole, which was precisely why she could give her forgiveness freely. "I forgive you, Mr. Croft," she said softly. The words hung in the air, and with them, the last ghost of her past finally faded away. Arthur had formally proposed the week after the fire, not with grand words on a scenic vista, but with a simple, earnest question over coffee at Agnes's kitchen table. "I cannot imagine my life without you in it, Cora. Will you be my wife?" Her yes had been a quiet, tearful whisper. Their wedding was a town-wide celebration. Agnes, bustling with pride, had baked a 3-tiered cake and insisted on sewing Cora's dress herself, a beautiful gown of pale blue cotton that matched her eyes. The entire town crammed into the small church, their faces beaming. Mr. Henderson from the Mercantile, the blacksmith whose shop was already being rebuilt with funds raised by the community, every boarder from Agnes's house, they were all there. They were her family now. Bertrand Croft sat in the back pew, a silent, humbled spectator. He had refused to give her away, stating quietly that he had forfeited that right long ago. It was Agnes who walked her down the aisle, her arm linked firmly with Cora's, her expression a fierce mix of pride and joy. When Cora reached the altar, Arthur took her hand, his thumb stroking hers in a gesture of reassurance and boundless love. His vows were not a recitation, but a heartfelt promise. "I promise to see your worth every day," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To cherish your strength, to honor your heart, and to make our home a place where you will always be safe and valued." As they were pronounced husband and wife, and Arthur leaned in to kiss her, Cora felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. She was home. She was not a burden. She was beloved. 10 years later, Cora stood on the porch of the Morgan homestead, a sprawling, prosperous ranch that felt more like home than any place she had ever known. The laughter of her 3 children, 2 boys with their father's steady gaze and a girl with her own fiery spirit, drifted up from the yard where they played under the shade of a large cottonwood. Arthur came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist in a familiar, loving embrace. He rested his chin on her shoulder, and together they watched their children, their shared legacy of love and resilience. The town of Providence had thrived, and they were at its heart. Cora, with her sharp mind for figures and compassionate heart, managed not only the ranch's accounts but also a small fund she and Arthur had established to help newcomers to the town get on their feet. No one would ever arrive in Providence and feel the hopeless despair she once had, not if she could help it. Agnes was a frequent visitor, a doting grandmother figure to the children, her tongue as sharp as ever but her eyes always soft when she looked at Cora's family. Bertrand had passed away peacefully a few years prior, having spent his final years in a small cottage on their land, finding a quiet redemption in the simple joys of being a grandfather. Cora reached into the pocket of her apron, her fingers closing around the small, pressed bluebonnet she had saved from her mother's book. It was laminated between 2 pieces of glass now, a permanent keepsake. Even in the hardest soil, beauty finds a way to grow. She had been that hard soil, broken and barren, but love and kindness had been the sun and rain. She had grown. She had bloomed. She was home.